Hi guys, in this video I'm going to do an exam review of May 25 IB Economics Paper 2 and Paper 3. Do check the description box, then you can find the timestamp for a specific paper of your interest. Alright then, let's give it a go. Alright, Paper 2, question number 1. A1. Define the term inflation indicated in bold in the text. The term means a general increase in prices and fall in the purchasing value of money. A2, define the term foreign aid indicated in bold in the text. It means multiple types of transfers from other countries or multilateral agencies to LADCs in most cases. So, for example, grant or humanitarian assistance. Question B1. Using information from Table 1, calculate the price elasticity of supply for tea in Kenya when the price changes from 324 KES per kilogram in 2021 to 340 KES per kilogram in 2022. So you first need to calculate the percentage change in quantity, which is this, and next is the percentage change of price, which is this, and you divide one with the other. So the PES is going to be this one, 602. B2, using information from Table 1, calculate the total revenue earned by Kenyan tea growers in 2022 in millions of KES. Pretty simple question. So if you check the Table 1, you can get the price 340, quantity 4800. So you multiply these two, then you can get the total revenue. Sketch a demand and supply diagram to indicate how drought caused the price of food to rise in Kenya. It's a simple diagram drawing question. So as the bad weather conditions, such as drought, should make output production of food decrease, so you should shift the supply curve to the left. Question C. Using an international trade diagram, explain how the quantity demanded of rice in Kenya will change if the tariff on imports of rice is reduced. As you can see, the new trade deal will make the existing tariff decrease. So the price of imported rice shall be cheaper. Therefore, the domestic demand will increase, which means the amount of imports will increase. Question D. Using an exchange rate diagram, explain how a contractionary monetary policy could prevent the depreciation of Kenyan currency. As you know, a contractionary monetary policy means central banks hikes interest rate, which will attract more foreign investment in the financial sector because they're going to give a higher financial investment return. Therefore, more demand for KES is necessary, leading to an appreciation of the currency. Question E. Using an ADAS diagram, explain the likely effect of the improvement in the level of education on Kenya's full employment level of output. Improving education is one of the most representative supply-side policies, since it promotes labor productivity following a country's potential output. So as you see, if Kenya provides better education to its citizens, the country's long-run full employment will increase, shifting the LRAS curve to the right. Question F. Using a Laurent curve diagram, explain what happened to the distribution of income in Kenya between 2015 and 2022. The country's Gini coefficient figure in 2015 was 0.408, and 7 years later, it got smaller to be 0.387. It means the distribution of income became more equal. So you should shift the curve to the left. Question G. Using information from the text data and your knowledge of economics, discuss the likely impact of high economic growth on environmental sustainability in Kenya. For this essay question, one easy way to start introduction is to put some general introduction of the country's economic data or issue. And along with that, you define key terms such as economic growth and environmental sustainability. After that, you identify these two goals above often collide one another, or if not, shall go along together. First, the discussion can focus on the positive impact of economic growth on environmental sustainability. So I brought multiple references from the text and the data given. So one is growth in the secondary and tertiary sectors, which may damage the environment less than the agriculture. So the growth can be positive in terms of transitioning to different industry. More employment could lead to higher level of incomes that allow for more environmentally sustainable living. And growth can allow for the government to help funding to other different productive sectors. And growth may have allowed 90% of electricity to be generated by renewables, which must be definitely eco-friendly. And economic growth has allowed for green markets to expand, and reforestation is improving the environmental damage. And economic growth has seen rapid urbanization and is encouraging more use of electric vehicles, which is definitely eco-friendly and environmentally sustainable. Lastly, economic growth can allow high tax revenue for the government, so it's going to allow more investment in sustainability-related projects. Moving on to the next discussion point, which is about the negative impact of economic growth on environmental sustainability. First, low productivity and limited access to technology in agriculture, if it is neglected, may lead to unsustainable practices or external cost of production. And the growth of tourism, for example, safaris, may damage the environment and culture. Also, the sales and business practice of SOEs or privatization may mean that firms are less concerned about possible environmental damage. Also, growth through export revenues from primary goods is volatile due to its low PD and external supply shocks, so that such can possibly make more environmentally damaging agricultural practices available. And growth from export production does not use resources sustainably, so it's difficult to meet the EU standard. Second last thing is urbanization from rapid growth results in using fossil fuels too much for transports, which is growing, obviously. It requires more efficiency. Growth leading to rapid urbanization, possibly more pollution, population growing fast, more strain on resources. All right, these are all the references that I brought from the text and data to discuss the impacts of economic growth on environmental sustainability of Kenya. Let's move on to question 2. Question 2. A1. Define the term economic growth indicated in bold in the text. The most classic definition of economic growth would be an increase in the amount of goods and services produced per head of the population over a period of time. A2. Define the term resources indicated in bold in the text. It refers to factors of production or inputs that are used to produce goods and services, such as land, labor, capital, entrepreneurship. Question B1. Using information from Table 4, calculate Bhutan's real GDP in US dollars in 2021. Real GDP is earned by dividing nominal with the GDP deflator and multiply this with 100. So this is the answer. Question B2. Using information from Table 4, calculate Bhutan's nominal GDP per capita in US dollars in 2021. You divide the nominal GDP with the population to get the per capita, so this is the answer. 4. Calculate the change in Bhutan's nominal gross national income, GNI, in US dollars between 2008 and 2021. So this one is asking us to calculate the change in GNI. So for this one, you need to subtract net income from nominal GDP to get the GNI. Obviously, it has to be done by each year. Then you can get the answer. Here we go. Question C. Using an ADAS diagram, explain the likely effect on Bhutan's real GDP of a large increase in sales of electricity produced in Bhutan to India. When the sales of electricity produced in Bhutan sold to India largely increases, it means the export increases. Followingly, national consumption and investment as well. So the AD will shift to the right, leading to a higher real GDP. Question D. Using a demand and supply diagram, explain the likely effect of improved road networks on the price of rice that is sold in Bhutan's towns. If there is an improvement in road networks, it will lead to a reduction in transportation costs and increase in sales in agriculture products and its trade. So it will ultimately increase the production, since farmers are incentivized to sell in diverse markets, which will overall reduce the price of rice. So you should shift the supply curve to the right. Question E. Using an exchange rate diagram, explain how the Central Bank of Bhutan could maintain its fixed exchange rate during a period of falling demand from India for metals and cement produced in Bhutan. Since Bhutan's currency is pegged to Indian won, so the central bank should keep the currency in a certain value, not allowing free change of its value. So when the currency value increases, such as demand rises, the authority immediately intervenes to the market and drag down the value of the currency by purchasing foreign currency or decreasing interest rates. Question F. Using an externalities diagram, explain how increased government investment in education could achieve allocative efficiency in Bhutan's education market. As you can check from the diagram, higher investment in education will lead to cheaper and more readily accessible education service to Bhutan citizens, which is currently underallocated. So the MPB curve shall shift to the right, making it closer to the socially optimal quantity. Question G. Using information from text, data, and your knowledge of economics, evaluate the strengths and limitations of Bhutan's economic development strategy. As I said earlier, you can smoothly start the essay by putting some general introduction of the country's economic data or issue, and you can define a few key terms, such as, for this case, I reckon economic development. And lastly, you can identify your aim to evaluate the strengths and limitations of Bhutan government's development policies. And for this question specifically, as there are multiple government policies mentioned in the given text, so your discussion should focus on evaluating each policy's pros and cons. Obviously, you would not have time and space to evaluate all the policies mentioned, so do keep in mind that what I'm doing for now is just for reference. So for the body one way to categorize multiple policies mentioned would be according to the characteristics of each policy. So I first made evaluation on demand-side policies. First policy mentioned is the government's aim to increase GNH, which is the index to measure income inequality, environmental conservation, sustainable development, etc. So I found some pros and cons of this policy, definitely referring to the given text and data. And second policy that I found is trade liberalization policy. Specifically, the Bhutan government intends to make FTA deal with India. So I found pros and cons of this policy as well. Last demand side policy that I found is the sales of electricity to India. So this policy also has its pros and cons. Next in Budget 2, the evaluation would focus on the supply side policies mentioned. So the first type of supply side policy is the Bhutan government plan to invest in hydropower and other infrastructure. So I could find some pros and cons of this supply side policy. Next, second type of supply side policy is the Bhutan government's plan to invest in healthcare and education. And pros and cons follow. Last policy that I decided to analyze is the partnership with UN agency to provide funds for investment in agriculture sector. This policy also has its own pros and cons. For the real exam, it will be surely enough to analyze at least 3 to 4 policies. All right, question number 1, it's about the country USA and mainly about G membership related topics. Question A1. Using figure 1, calculate the change in consumer surplus resulting from the increased demand for G memberships. As you can check from the diagram, the consumer surplus used to be this much triangle, but the demand is increasing. So the triangle for the consumer surplus has been increased. The triangle for the consumer surplus is getting bigger, so we need to find the change. So this is the new triangle, this is the previous triangle, and you find the change. This is the answer. Question A2. Using a diagram, explain how market failure may exist in the market for gym memberships. As the diagram above illustrates, use of gym membership represents a positive externality, since workout is a very good, considering the fact that when people get more fit, less healthcare costs needed, productivity rises, etc. And currently, the market is experiencing underallocation of the resources. In other words, the gym membership is underconsumed than it should be. So the market has welfare loss and misallocation of resources. Researchers have investigated the reason for low levels of physical activity. An economics professor has argued that the main reason for the lack of exercise amongst young adults is that they have bounded self-control. Others argue that there is a poor awareness of the benefits of regular physical exercise. And the question asks us to define the term bounded self-control. The term means that, unlike our expectations, when individuals make economic decisions, they often do not successfully exercise self-control, or they are not fully rational enough to make decisions. Probably because they're bound to their past experiences, bias, or prejudices, etc. Next, a small town in the USA has a population of 2,700. Given the high cost of exercise equipment and small population, the gym in the town is considered to be a natural monopoly. Sketch a diagram showing the average cost curve for a natural monopoly. As you can see, a natural monopoly has much higher initial cost spending. Since it is quite costly to establish the production facility in the beginning, you can think of the example of electricity or telecommunication facilities. But as it increases the production, the average cost decrease is much more dramatic, as it has a bigger scale of businesses like national service, public service, etc. Next question, using table 1, calculate the marginal revenue if the number of members increases from 300 to 400 per month. Marginal revenue refers to the additional revenues that you earn when you sell one more unit of goods or service. So when total number of customer is 300, you earn 30,000. You can get the value by multiplying quantity with the price. And then when you have total 400 customers, you earn 36. So the total revenue increase is 6,000 from that. So the total revenue increase is 6,000. And then you divide this with the additional number of customer, which is 100. So the marginal revenue is $60. Using table 1, calculate the increase in profit if the number of members increases from 400 to 500 per month. So for profit, you calculate this by total revenue minus total cost. So this is the profit you earn when you have 500 customers. This one is when you have 400 customers. So this is the change in profit, 900. Next question. If the number of members increases from 500 to 600 per month, we only have numbers until 500, but anywho, 500 to 600 per month, total cost per month will increase by 2,800. Using table 1, calculate the average cost per member for 600 members. So when you have 500 customers, you spend 24,700 total cost. But when you have 600 customers, the question says you spend 2,800 more. So if you sum these two, then you can get the total cost for 600 customers. And if you want to know your average cost, then you divide this with your quantity, which is 600. You can get the average cost. Some residents of the town have complained that the gym membership fee is too high and that the owner only cares about profit. The owner has stated that this is false and the profit is not the main objective of the business. Explain two alternative business objectives other than profit maximization, which the owner might adopt. Not every firms run their businesses with the aim of making the biggest profit. Some companies, like social enterprises, have a bit different goals, such as being more socially responsible, which is CSR, or some firms, if they are in the infant stage of their business, what they aim is to first increase the market share or brand name to the public, even if they make some losses. Or maybe they are in their stable and mature state, like they're big enough and rich enough, then they simply seek to keep the status quo. So, but they do this by keeping the current level of cost of spending and profit, which is called satisficing. Question B. Using the text and data provided and your knowledge of economics, recommend a policy which could be introduced by the government of the USA to increase the number of people getting regular exercise. All right, for this type of essay, you can start with a brief summary of the country's economic data given or the general issue mentioned in the essay, and then you can identify the main issue that shall be discussed in the essay. Last, you introduce a policy that you recommend to address the issue that you identified above. For this case, I would recommend the provision of subsidies to public gym facilities to encourage more regular exercise amongst the US public. Content. You can fill out your body worn content talking about your logic behind recommending the policy. Again, I brought all my evidences from the given contents and data. Exercise is quite problematic. Also, social cost of lack of exercise is pretty significant in the US community. And also, there are considerable benefits of having regular exercise. And demand on workout is increasing, which means people want to work out, but they cannot really find proper facilities. Also, as I read from the text, private provision of gym or exercise facilities is not meeting the public demand. That's why I suggest that giving subsidies on public exercise facilities can enhance both quantity and price accessibility of the service. Next, in Budget 2, you can write down a few potential concerns or limitations on your policy recommendation. So there is a reference that saying that despite the increase in gym membership, there is still concern about the lack of exercise in the USA. So maybe the quantity or availability is not the main problem, maybe. And also there was a reference that saying researchers have investigated the reasons. The reason why Americans don't properly or don't exercise enough would be it's because they have found the self-control or they have poor awareness of it, not because of the lack of number of the exercise facilities or something. That's why I can admit that so much more fundamental long-term policy should be needed, such as education and positive campaigning, etc. All right, this is enough for question 1. Let's move on to question 2. All right, question 2 is about the country Japan. A1, outline the relationship shown by the data in figure 2. Figure 2. It shows the typical short-run trade-off between unemployment and inflation, which means when unemployment rises, price level falls, as illustrated by the short-run Phillips curve. The changing structure of the Japanese economy from manufacturing towards services has led to mismatches in job opportunities and skills. As a result, the 3% natural rate of unemployment is mostly due to structural unemployment. A2, on figure 2, draw the long-run Phillips curve for Japan. I already did that, so let me give you a few more detailed explanation about the reason why it is vertical. So theoretically, in the long run, the market adjusts to the price changes and the price becomes fully flexible. So there is no more trade-off between inflation and unemployment. So the long-run Phillips curve becomes vertical at the rate of 3% natural rate of unemployment. Next, using table 2, calculate the total cost of the basket of goods per week in Japanese yen in 2023. Enter your result in table 3. 2023, I summed all of them, so this is the answer. Next, using table 3, calculate the CPI for Tokyo in 2023. Here, the question says base year is 2020. So total cost spent in 2020 is this much. And in 2023, I just calculated. So you divide the base year cost by the year that you just got for 2023. And then you multiply the value with that, and then you can get the answer. Next, using table 3, calculate the rate of inflation for 2023. Rate of inflation in 2023 can be calculated with the CPI numbers of the 2 years, 2022 and 2023, since we normally compare rate of inflation of this year with the previous year. So the difference between 2 years CPI CPI for 2023 and CPI for 2022, difference between 2 years and divided by the old one and multiply this with 100, then you can get the rate of inflation. Next, explain 2 limitations of using the CPI to estimate the inflation rate in Tokyo. Just like other indicators like GDP or GNI, CPI is not perfect, so it has its own limitations. Firstly, it does not reflect quality changes, which means the rise in price may be due to quality improvement, but the index does not reflect this change and simply making the product price as just more expensive compared to last year. Also, it has substitution bias. Naturally, when one product price rises, consumers naturally replace their original consumption to substitute one, but CPI assumes that people keep buying the same items, so that you can assume that the index sometimes can be a bit exaggerated. The given information says the banks decide to collude. In other words, they're not going to pursue the strategy that is only best for themselves. So for the question, using table 4, identify a strategy for each bank that would maximize their combined total profit. So if they collude, then they're going to pursue combined profit. Guys, they're not going to pursue the strategy that is only best for themselves, but to choose the biggest combined profit. So in that regard, 2 banks raise interest rate. If they both choose this option, this guarantees the biggest combined profit, which is 6. Other options give smaller combined profit, like 5.2 or 5. Therefore, Therefore, each bank should raise the interest rate. Using profit figures from table 4 show that Bank A has an incentive cheat by the following the agreement. So in this case, we need to find whether Bank A has dominant strategy or not. So having dominant strategy means you stick to one option regardless of the choice that is made by the counterpart. So when Bank B goes to raise the interest rate, then you can check these options. In this case, Bank A would go for lower interest rate because 3.2 is bigger than 3. How about Bank B this time goes to lower interest rate? Then Bank A has these two options. And then in this case, Bank A would still go to lower interest rate because 2.5 is bigger than 2. So what we can see is that no matter what decision Bank B made, Bank A will always go for one option, which is lower interest rate, which means it sticks to one option. So it means Bank A has a dominant strategy of lowering interest rate. So in this case, by lowering its interest rate, Bank A would earn Japanese yen 3.2 million, which is greater than 3 million. Next question. The nominal interest rate on savings in Bank A is 0.8. The rate of inflation is 1. Calculate the real interest rate. Pretty simple question, because if you subtract the inflation rate from nominal interest rate, then you can get real interest rate. So you get the answer. The process of money creation by the commercial banks increases the money supply. Yes. The Bank of Japan can control the size of the money supply through the open market operations, quantitative easing, or by changing the minimum reserve requirement, which is 0.8. Explain the money creation process by a customer's cash deposit of 10,000 Japanese yen in Bank A eventually result in a much greater increase in Japan's money supply. Then when a person deposits 10,000, then the bank should keep 0.8% of it, and then the rest of the money can be lent out to the other customers. So first, to calculate the minimum money supply with the deposit, you first need to calculate the money supplier. So in this case, 1 divided by the required reserve ratio, 0.8, then you can get the money supplier, which is 1.25. And then you multiply the deposit $10,000. You multiply the deposit 10,000 with the money supplier, then you can get the maximum money supply increase, which is this much big. Question B. Using the text and data provided and your knowledge of economics, recommend a policy that could be used in Japan to increase the rate of inflation to 2%. For this type of essay, you can start with a brief summary of the country's economic data or issue mentioned in the text, and then you can identify the main issue that shall be discussed in the essay. Last, you introduce a policy that you recommend to address the issue identified above. In this case, I would recommend the Japanese government to conduct expansionary monetary policies to boost business and consumer confidence. In body 1, you can talk about your logic behind recommending this policy. So for me, I found out multiple references from the text and data. So first, there is persistent deflation, which is causing a downward spiral on wage level or consumer living standard. So the economy of Japan has been subject to many periods of deflation. So because of that, wage levels has been stick to low. So there is lack of consumption and business investment and confidence. It has caused chronic recession. So also, fiscal policy that the government conducted has not been very successful. That's why I recommend the Japanese government to this time relying on the central bank to conduct expansionary monetary policy by lowering interest rates, since it can boost business investment and consumption. That simply seems so That simply seems so necessary, considering the types of unemployment that the country mainly experiences. Because it says the changing structure of the Japanese economy from manufacturing towards services has led to mismatches, so to make a major transition to the new business sector with some incentive of the interest rate getting cheaper so that they can be more motivated to start new investment and new business, you know. However, I found some limitations on my recommendation, so I'm gonna write down that on my body too. So problem is market response can be quite minimal because the prolonged recession in the country's economy is too severe. So maybe the economic confidence is too low to respond to expansionary monetary policy. And at the same time, government debt, private sector debt, can hinder the further borrowing. Even if the interest rate is getting lowered, people don't really respond because they already have too much debt. Lastly, the banking sector is oligopoly, as mentioned in the text. So the banks are highly likely to collude to keep the profit level from the interest, so which may deter the impact of expansionary monetary policy. So that's my concern on that. However, nonetheless, I still do recommend my policy. Anywho, so this is the end of paper 3. Thanks for watching.